this is my dilemma. I'm trying to use more AI because I've realized I have to. It's
Yeah,
just
to
like
keep
for
up.
like for my
To keep up.
tasks. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, to keep up.
I had some unfortunate. Oh no! I typed in a prompt and it actually did help me a lot. Jesus, my
I
little desk in
Simon,
my little office.
I'm very happy that you eventually gave in here because
Yeah, I know.
you
You and
had
I
your
had
heels
this
dug in
conversation like
really
a
hard.
year
Yes.
ago.
I was
Yeah.
like, just do it, man. Just do it. And you should be drafting your emails and managing your calendar and just do it. And you're like, no, I don't trust it. I don't like it. But I'm glad you're on the
still don't like
over
it.
on the side.
I'll say this: Gemini is kind of dumb. It's only like kind of smart.
And I think I'm to understand that you are switching from Gemini to Claude
I'm thinking about it.
on ideological grounds.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've also heard it's best in class. So it's like I get
From whom? Did you ask Claude?
Yeah,
Did
no,
you ask
I did not ask Claude. I asked other flesh and blood humans. I've got a friend on the hill who's very smart, and I asked her what she uses, and she immediately went, Claude for coding, yada yada yada. Just like went down the list of the different tools that she uses. And like most people, I think when you ask someone a question and they like immediately rattle off, "Here's what I do," it inspires some confidence. Like, "Oh, you've thought about this. Great. I don't have to. Now I don't have to."
Or a language model informed her thinking. And first, your friend, a staffer on the hill, uses Claude for coding. I'm just going to interrogate this a little bit.
She has a tech background. She has sold a company.
Interesting.
Has I don't know that I want to talk about the equity positions that she has on the pod, but I'll talk to you about it offline later. She's a fascinating individual.
But yeah, we don't want to dox anybody here, but this is confidence inspiring for me because sometimes you think, oh, congressional staffers are just ho-hum, lifelong from zero bureaucrats and never actually did anything in their lives. I love the idea of a
I'd say it's both.
A technologist.
There's a pretty good split on the hill between like I started answering phones and this is the only thing I've ever done. I've been on the hill forever, which is useful in some regards, right? To be an institutionalist. And then there's a good number of people that get recruited in for expertise. And this is particularly true in defense where you see lots of combat veterans and folks that have done the thing. I call it DEI for veterans because it's almost impossible to get a defense job on the hill if you're not a veteran. And they recruit for that specific purpose, both because of expertise and also talking to veteran constituents is really hard if you're a civilian. They have difficult lived experiences. But yeah, so I started using Gemini. That's what I'm using right now because I'm so like already enmeshed in the Google suite of stuff. And you guys know me. I'm left of center. So all of my peers and friends have really strong thoughts about AI usage and what it's doing to us.
So do those friends include the vegans who are apparently quite upset about language models
the vegans
and
are
data
now,
centers?
Yes. Well, first of all, yes. Lots of vegan friends. I was vegan for almost 10 years. It's a thing that I came up around. And they're kind of on the opposite position now because there's this like strong strain of, I think, younger folks.
They're pro AI, pro data centers, pro language models.
No, they're mad about the hypocrisy of it.
So they're mad about they're anti.
They're mad about the hypocrisy of the left position, which is a common thing. We are a big circular firing squad, right? We love to shoot at each other. But one of the major complaints, at least that I've seen about like the developing AI industry, is around data centers and how much water this consumes and all of the power that goes to it. And I think some of those could potentially be valid, but I from my background in the vegan community, I know the water one to be bullshit. And there's been a couple of articles now and people started doing the preliminary research because the dairy industry uses about 250 times the amount of water that the data center industry does. And when I say 250 times, I mean trillions of liters of water is used for livestock cultivation, and divide that by 250 just to get to like the footprint of data centers, which will grow, but it would be unbelievable for them to catch up to the dairy industry. Which is to say, we're not going to run out of water because of AI. It's not going to happen. That's not
We
how
might
this
because
works.
of cows.
We might because of cows. And this is a very American thing where we will give the water to the cows in order to maintain the lifestyle that we want, which is to drink milk, and eat steak before we stop stealing the Colorado River for everyone's consumption.
Yes. I
Yeah,
love.
yes.
I mean, I just can't get enough.
You'll be
tri-tip.
sitting in your home, drinking your milk, eating your steak, talking to your AI assistant because all your neighbors died of thirst in the water wars, and you'll be happy to do it.
The water wars, are those coming?
The water wars
All
have
right.
started. What are you talking about? Are they coming?
And with that breaking news that the water wars have started, welcome to the Goat Rodeo podcast. I'm your host, Garrett Smith, joined by regular co-hosts Simon Coon and Dave Caudle. With the water wars starting, it's hard to keep focus on the currently, hot war in Iran. But I'm going to do my best.
That's
Simon,
the water war, Garrett. Where do you think all the Middle East tension comes from? The water scarcity.
I think I'm going to stay closer to the trunk of the tree on this one rather than getting out on that limb with you.
We got to get Chris Booth back in here. He'll tell you about water's impact on these conflicts. I can't believe I'm being gaslit on my own podcast.
I just rewatched the show Generation Kill, and there's a whole exhaustive discussion in that in the book, and I've got to assume it happened in real life once upon a time when Evan Wright recorded it, and then they turned it into the show, and there's a whole description about why there are conflicts in the Middle East. And I'm just not going to say it here. Go and research it on your own. But with the water wars raging, I'm going to attempt to redirect our focus back to the conflict in Iran.
One day we should do a full episode of just conspiracies, though. I feel like that would be a good time for at least me for sure.
We definitely should. You're right. We definitely should do that.
A special Halloween episode of the Goat Rodeo, only Simon's thoughts on the water wars.
And other conspiracies. Yes.
Yeah, aliens in the water.
I can't
fighting
wait.
over the water.
I cannot wait. So Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Kane, on March 2nd, so a number of days ago at time of recording, described that the transition point had already been passed from a standoff conflict to a stand-in conflict, and I think that this is useful because it deepens the conversation around whether we're using up critical stockpiles that were intended, critical stockpiles of munitions and standoff weapons and interceptors and a whole range of other capabilities that really should be preserved for the pacing threat in the Indo-Pacific. And preparing for a different theater conflict bubbling up, bubbling over. As a background note, some interceptor and other kind of exquisite capabilities were actually repositioned from the Indo-Pacific in Japan and Korea and elsewhere, and put into CENTCOM to provide capability there. So there's like an actual explicit trade-off going on at some level. But the transition from standoff to stand-in conflict is important because, in Dan Kane's words, think of it as shooting the archer instead of the arrows. In other words, in a stand-in phase of conflict, we're actually going after the ground-based stockpiles, launchers, and other capabilities, perhaps even down to like supply chain and other items, so that we are expending fewer of our exquisite munitions and other capabilities in more of a standoff conflict. Do you guys have thoughts on this? And in other words,
so many thoughts.
Okay.
Do you think this will be less than $1 billion a day now?
I don't even know why you're bringing up the dollar figure. Bring up the dollar figure within context, Simon.
Presumably, we're having a conversation about the resources being expended in this campaign. Is it going to cost less than $1 billion? You want to talk about trade-offs. The DoD is spending its own money that was appropriated based off of last year's approximations. It's not infinite. There was not an endless well of money sitting in the bank, and they're spending $1 billion a day to fight this enemy. Is switching from one to the other going to reduce that? I doubt it.
Yeah, I don't know. I
Six of one, half a dozen of the other is my guess.
I don't really know, but there's a long history of presidents getting the nation involved in, call it, preemptive defensive activities or limited military intervention activities, and then expecting that Congress will later back up the warfighting expenditures through additional appropriations packages because of the political cost of abandoning, and I'm got air quotes here, abandoning the warfighter, right? So like
pretty much every president, actually.
Yeah, that's right.
That's a long history. All of them. Every
probably
president
all of
said,
them.
"I'm president. I can go to war. I'm going to war," and then they're going to come back and go, "You're going to let the troops starve?
Right.
Cowards!"
That's exactly right. Yeah. Yeah.
It's insane.
Well, I mean, even George Washington, before our country was a country, George Washington was doing this with the Continental Congress. It was putting the revolutionary, American troops into really dire situations and expecting that the Continental Congress would respond in
Slightly
positive
different from
ways.
a war of choice. I guess you could call the revolution a war of choice if the choice is being an independent nation with self-determination versus not. These are interesting choices.
Sure. So I think we know, Simon, where you come down on this. You think that it's costing the American taxpayer too much money and that Congress didn't authorize it. And those are your two major kind of sensibilities about the conflict.
I don't. I actually agree with Marco Rubio that every president does and always has had the independent power to do this and has done it every single time. There is extraordinarily more precedent that this is well within the president's powers. I just think it's a mistake. I think that the strategic goals are squishy, and I think we have a lot of evidence of what limited intervention in the Middle East leads to, regardless of how good we do it. I don't know that there's a single example of doing it really well in the Middle East as far as America is concerned. And I do know for a fact that it's costing us $1 billion a day. And I promise you that the congressional fight that's about to happen here is going to be very different from past ones. I don't think there will be a supplemental that passes. I think they're going to have to write a supplemental to pay for the Iran war, and they're going to have to attach it to the next fiscal year funding bill just to get it through over the finish line. That's my guess.
But I thought you said it wouldn't pass. So you're saying something like a supplemental will pass, but it'll get baked into the FY27.
Right. They're going to, instead of giving the opportunity to have like okay, I want to vote no on the supplemental because I disagree with the war and you should eat it. What they're going to say is the entire Department of Defense gets defunded if you don't vote for this supplemental, which is a classic like Congress tactic, right? Like I'm going to attach it to something unpleasant to something you really want in order to make the pill go down.
In order to right size that supplemental, wouldn't we have to have an educated guess on how long this is going to last?
One would hope, Dave, but no, that's not what we're going to do. We're just going to pick a point in time and go that many dollars, and then we'll just keep going to war because the president's going to do what he wants to do.
Well, let me just weave in some like strategic positioning, counter positioning thought here, and then we can shift topics. But
yeah, we haven't even got to the part where I think we're never going to war with China,
and I hope we never do. Right. I hope we never do. But think about this. In the same way that you didn't want to broadcast to the Iranians through a big, like, open public debate about whether we should or shouldn't go to war with Congress authorizing or not authorizing war, in order to preserve the element of surprise in Operation Epic Fury, right? Which I think had devastating effect on the Iranians because of the element of surprise, right? And you would never have been able to contain that discussion in Congress. Well, there would be months or whatever of build up and conversation and debate and whatever, and like you would completely. So in the same way, if you in Congress authorize a specific amount of funding that's tied to a specific end date for conflict, as we know in any conflict that even looks remotely like the Iranian one, all they need to do is survive. And all they need to do is like hold out, until the date of withdrawal, when the funds dry up and the carrier strike groups go back to their regular patrolling, right?
I think you're applying an American logic set to that, though. All they're trying to do is survive, period. I think your most likely outcome, and I've talked to some smart folks, is either the IRGC takes over and becomes the strong armed security state, or it's pure balkanized chaos in Iran. They're not thinking through how do I outlast congressional dollars. They're thinking through how do I get a hold of the food and the little remaining gas to keep my generators running so I can control the populace.
What I am saying, I'm not arguing with that point at all. What I'm saying is that in the event that the U.S. defined the exact timeline for how long we want to be involved here, even if this is not a primary consideration for the Iranians or the IRGC or whatever kind of remnants of regime are left or whatever, they will hear that and say, "Oh, we just need to last until June 24th or whatever the end date of congressionally appropriated funding."
Maybe
dry up.
I feel
Yeah.
like we are taking a third and fourth order thing and making it like, this is the most important thing. We got to maintain surprise. Meanwhile, the president is talking about strategic reserves of munitions, which is a much worse strategic showing of your hand than a surprise attack on Iran ever will be.
No,
The
no,
most dangerous thing we could be doing here is signaling to the world that we might be low on munitions in any regard. That's way worse, particularly when you think about the pacing threat. Never
that was
mind
a
whether or not we use them.
that was a press generated line of discussion on munition stockpiles, to which
But the
the
president
administration
responded.
is responding. But yeah, okay, but like
That
there is
matters.
yeah, but Simon, they have not at all defined how much time or how much is still in the munition stockpile. Like they,
Sure.
in other words, it is still an unknown to everybody outside of the strategic, planning groups in the U.S. government and in the military.
The
Nobody
exact numbers
really
are
knows.
totally unknown. Do you think we're sending a signal of strength when our president is clapping back at the press about the state of our munitions stockpiles on Truth Social?
Well, this is all Dan Kane's point where we started, right? So
And I
the
think that's
best,
what Dan Kane's doing. I think
yeah,
he's trying to signal the position of strength, given that his like
That's right.
politicals are
yes,
not really doing that. And he's like, whoa, 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 let
yeah.
me get control of the narrative here. Dan Kane's doing truly the Lord's work in a very difficult position.
The best defense is a good offense. Go after the quiver of arrows, match the appropriate target to the appropriate weapon, evolve the tactics, save the exquisite capabilities and exquisite munitions for the pacing threat.
Interestingly, and I'll use this as the segue, target selection and orchestration and at some level automation has long been kind of the goal for the joint fires and complex air or standoff campaign. Excuse me. It's been reported that well over 1,000 targets in the first day of the conflict, well over 1,000 targets were identified using the Maven smart system and embedded or underlying artificial intelligence or language model based capabilities, which, parenthetical here, includes Anthropic's Claude, which we'll get to in a little bit. But it is interesting that we are now actively test driving in live operations the application of AI in the orchestration, target selection, and joint fires coordination phases of conflict. And that was just the first day, right? So I think that the total number of targets prosecuted is well into the many thousands, perhaps tens of thousands at this point. And it's being handled again, reportedly by just a very small handful of people, like 20 people, and a set of language model capabilities embedded in the Maven smart system. And just a bit of background here. Palantir and AWS are kind of the vehicles through which language model capabilities like Anthropic's Claude are being integrated into the tactical planning and target ranking, battlefield simulation, administrative kind of like acceleration of the joint fires workflows, which is pretty interesting. Like we've been tracking the Maven system, which then became Maven Smart System, and then was tested and is still being tested by the 18th Airborne Corps Scarlet Dragon series of exercises and a whole range of other things. It is pretty interesting to see this being fielded live. Dave, are you close enough to any of that to maybe comment on what this means for modern warfare, or perhaps tying it back to how is the defense technology kind of ecosystem being disrupted by the tech sector?
Yeah, I think we can probably start uh, with a vignette that's sort of taken over the political issue and news cycle, which is one of those strikes on the first day hit a school building in Iran, um, causing civilian casualties. And investigations are ongoing. I don't know the ground truth here, but the reporting has fixated on that and has made an assumption that AI either was or could have been used for the targeting
Can
cycle
I
that,
can I add
that
a little
led to that
context to
strike.
that? Because I want to
Please.
be clear, and I think it's a terrible strike, but that specific school was a part of an IRGC complex, and at some point, it was turned into a school.
And
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 So it's not
Okay.
like a wildly they just picked a school out of a hat. It's more like what was your models catching up type of
Well,
thing.
okay, and
Right.
a
So
couple.
if you've trained the model on a million images of what a military structure looks like,
Mhm.
it's going to say that looks like a military structure.
Right.
So I think it's important to sort of understand what these things are doing at a base level, right? It's image recognition, it's image analysis, it's pattern of life analysis. So it's really just assisting analysts, flagging possible targets, and accelerating sort of the data processing. It takes a human a long time to do. So in this situation where you've got time pressure, there's still a human in the loop, but they are, I think, in many cases, just validating what the machine has already come to or
Right.
nominating for
Hundreds of
targets.
targets.
Right. Yes, the machine is going site A, suspected missile launcher, site B, drone storage, site C, logistics depot, with a percentage confidence tied to it from all of those deductions that it's made. And then that human who's in a, time pressure environment to nominate targets is that, as we press the attack, makes mistakes as well. So we actually don't know if that was the case here, but the reporting is making the deduction that it may have been, and the reason why we ended up striking a girls' school was partially due because a machine that had been trained on many images that look a lot like that building, and it was adjacent to the actual legitimate military target, probably suggested it is a legitimate target.
So a couple of additional pieces of background just to emphasize why this is a massive, not just political topic, but it also raises kind of the ethics and morals of AI targeting systems in the context of standoff uh, and remotely executed fires workflows. Um, this is a girls' elementary school in Minab, southern Iran. The strike killed approximately. This is reporting that I'm getting from the internet, so like there's potential error here. It's reported to have resulted in the death of between 165 and 180 people, most of whom were girls aged 7 to 12, which is unbelievably terrible. It's tragic. And all in the mix of this is that just 24 hours before the war began, the Trump administration blacklisted Anthropic's Claude platform in Department of War and I think maybe all government systems, and defined a transition plan. There were other competitive language model providers, OpenAI, XAI, a bunch of others who were in the mix, but some analysts now think that part of the error in this and potentially other erroneous strikes or misapplied remote strikes was the result of critical data failures in the transition or kind of swap out of AI tools. I don't know
Mm.
to the extent that that could possibly be true. It seems really dumb that on the day before a large, activity like
There's no way they were swapping stuff out that
there's
fast.
no way that they were swapped. But this is, I think, one claim by elements of the administration. But geospatial data layers did flag that the entire compound was a military target, and I think this is to both of your points. There was reporting, and this is Al Jazeera, and trust that if you will. I don't know, but the missiles in the plural in this case, missiles struck this IRGC, Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps base, and the school, but it skipped a medical clinic that was situated directly between them. In other words, it appeared from overhead imagery analysis that that there was a huge amount of precision. Like the Maven smart system did not target the medical clinic, but was targeting other military facilities or structures around them, which kind of indicates that perhaps there was incorrect or manipulated data or just an error in identifying a target as military instead of a school compound. And then maybe the last piece here is that there is the potential for AI-driven information warfare, not just in the offense, but also on
Yeah.
the
Can you
defense. In
fool
other
the
words,
models?
can you fool the models, right? So there's this deep fake lure effort by an Iranian state-linked cyber group called Red Kitten that has reportedly used generative AI tools to create fake forensic medical files containing malware, and these are potentially part of the lead up to um, an information campaign that's unfolding from the victims of the school strike, and it's been used to infect devices of activists and journalists who are covering this whole thing. So I'm not saying that any of this is true per se, but there's this whole unfolding world of AI infused warfare that calls into question a lot of morals and ethics.
I think that
And the
last sentence is the most important one. We're
well, and
not
the
sure
trade off,
what's true.
totally, it's you're not sure what's true, and the trade off is uh, versus speed, right? So if you want to execute a very rapid, initial phase of a campaign, like we apparently did in Iran, the trade off there is certainty about the military viability of a target. And we're using AI tools to make that as certain as it possibly can be, but we're uncovering here in this school strike situation that even that has its errors and flaws and can be manipulated. So
I got
this is a
problems.
toughie.
I
You
got
got problems.
real problems with this. At the minimum, we need to have a large investigation of this specifically, not just because of the candidly incorrigible and unforgivable act of potentially bombing a small girl's school and how that looks for America and how America conducts itself in a war of choice where Americans are not necessarily at risk yet. Like, we had the time to pick our targets, and for whatever reason led to us moving so fast, we need to investigate that. We need to investigate, was it old data? Was it hallucinated data? Was it maybe an Israeli model versus an American model, which are built on different assumptions, and biases can get built into those models? There's a huge list of stuff that, like, is no longer theoretical, and this is a prime, like, time to do a real deal forensic top to bottom on this specific incident in order to prove out some of these. Okay, like, these are the times when we know we need to move fast versus not. These are some of the safety guardrails that need to be put in place. Like, clearly it's no longer a theoretical philosophical conversation. Even if you took the low end of that number and cut it in half and called it the best case scenario, you just killed a couple dozen girls.
Or more. Yeah.
And
Um,
it's horrible. Like, I don't know why there's not calls for, like, a real investigation, and I'm not saying I wanna see stars ripped off of shoulders and people, hung for this, but I wanna know that
well,
the American military is preparing for this scenario in the future because it's gonna happen again.
this shouldn't make you feel better, Simon, given the tragedy unfolding or that occurred. But while Secretary Pete Hegseth defended the operations and kind of described that the Iranians and others deliberately fired missiles from civilian structures, schools, medical facilities in order to lure American strikes onto targets or whatever. General Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, acknowledged that the strikes did occur in the Manab region. Didn't confirm or deny that it hit this school or a school at all, but described that the Pentagon is actively investigating. So there is an investigation going on somewhere in the bowels of the Pentagon, and I got to believe that they are treating this extremely seriously. What they cannot have on their hands is a massive political backlash from employing technology that results in the mass killing of unarmed civilians, specifically girls in a girls' elementary school.
And
Right?
I didn't touch on it much, but I think there's a very serious threat when we talk about potential adversary action here. Because if I am, and not even just the Iranians, if I am any adversarial actor, right now I'm thinking, what can I do to trick those AI-powered tools into doing things that either embarrass the Americans or even actively harm? Can I get them to attack their allies? Like, there's a ton of opportunity there for some smart software-minded warfighters.
It's
Um,
but deception is always featured even before we
Totally.
started adding autonomy. They're
So
going
are
to
we
attempt
thinking
to
about
apply
AI deception right
deception.
now?
I
I don't hear it talked about very often.
I'd like to think so. I'd hope so.
I'm
I
sure
think that
somebody is, but
I'm sure
there's like a
somebody.
question of
Uh,
scale. Is that factoring into the highest level conversations about, like, yeah, get out there and let Maven Smart, like, run it? Like, well, maybe we should.
the investigation which needs to happen will likely find multiple failure points. The technology may or may not be one. I don't want to jump to the conclusion that the technology is or was one because, well, so autonomous vehicles take a lot of crap every time there's an accident, right? Autonomous vehicle. Oh my gosh, like the technology's not there, and autonomous
Right.
human drivers are terrible.
Yeah, they're awful.
They're
Yeah.
awful. So like if it's the
I mean,
technology is going.
human drivers are implicated in nearly every single one of the 70,000 road deaths every single
Exactly.
year,
Ex-
and like autonomy systems have been implicated in like one every 2 or 3 years, right? So
ex-
like,
Exactly. So
there's a difference here.
even if it's flawed, if it makes fewer mistakes than the human or the same number of mistakes as a human, it's not the fault of the it's not the fault of the technology or the technology developers. I think that that's the I think that likely what the investigation will find is that it was a predictable mistake based off of the training data or the bias, to Simon's point, that a well-trained, highly qualified U.S. military targeter could have made as well.
Yeah, that's right. And if this is human on or in the loop as opposed to full autonomy, then a human actually was involved in, pressing go on, an MSS, a Maven Smart System derived targeting package, right? So, and I think the investigation will likely result. Who knows if the results of that investigation will ever truly be public at the scale that Simon probably prefers.
Yeah,
That
I'd like a
work,
congressional one, but we'll call it whatever.
and maybe that happens. Like, who knows?
Post
Who really
midterms,
knows?
it's a possibility, I think.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Yeah, with the change in Congress. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
And I'm
agree.
not saying that will be the best motivation in the world, right? I think it's like it could very easily be like a political reprisal if the House flips. But again, if I am Dan Kane, I'm thinking about that. Like, war is a political activity, things like this go wrong. And this is the difference between the car example, is that, yeah, uh, probably, 42 targets per hour, probably doing a much better job than if a human was trying to do that by themselves. However, one failure in war can like erode the entire political will of the nation if it is embarrassing enough or if it is tragic enough to like sway public opinion. This is chess, not checkers.
I'm
Yeah.
not discounting the
Yeah, I
significance
didn't
in
think
any
you
way.
were, but I wanted to like really ram it up.
I mean, it's perhaps the potential equivalent of that photo from the Vietnam War of the South Vietnamese policeman executing a guy on the side of the road, right?
That's all it takes. Like, and then you
that's
wake up one day and you're like, oh, this is the news now. It's
that's right.
not all of the good things we did. It is one of your bombs hit the wrong building, and the robot helped make the decision.
Yep, that's right. Yep. On the topic of robots helping to make decisions, it appears that the Trump administration has decided that Claude from Anthropic will no longer be helping to make any decisions across government at all.
What could
I'm,
go wrong?
yeah. So I think there are many different ways to perceive this Anthropic ban within U.S. government systems. One could be that this is a headwind. In other words, like a politically infused headwind for new tech being meaningfully adopted into U.S. government workflows. That's one take on it. Another might be that there really are bars you've got to clear and wickets you've got to pass through and agreements that you have to sign up to if you're going to work with the U.S. government with certain technologies. I'm of the opinion that this is simply a yet another step in a long negotiation about how Anthropic will actually end up being used within U.S. government workflows, and this is not the end of the road. Yeah, what are your opinions on either side of this? Are you concerned? Do you care? Is it a non-story and it just will everything will buff out? What do you think?
So I think the real debate that they're having, like the Anthropic Department of War dispute, is really about whether the AI developers can restrict how their models are used by the United States military, or whether like national security can override those restrictions. This is this is a larger policy debate
Yeah,
almost, right?
right.
Um, and I think that the Pentagon's position is probably like, you generated this capability and I will use it for Pentagon tasks. Period. You do not get to control or place restrictions on how I can use your technology.
This touches so many things, and like that argument that Dave just described is basically an IP fight, which you don't see in just AI. There's companies all over, usually much smaller ones, who are constantly fighting with DoD about this is my IP and this is the way in which my IP gets used, mostly for the purposes of I need to make money off my IP or I can't continue to do this. This is just not like a tenable business position. I think there's several fights playing out at once. I think that in some regards, this is a hyper political, this specific admin versus this specific entity. I also think that this is a salvo in a much larger like regulatory conversation about AI and tech adoption at DoD. I mean, I think the posturing is practically a non-starter, right? Like the idea, like I'm not an AI expert by any means, but everyone that I've ever talked to, and if I ever in the last month, has told me that Claude is best in class, and it is certainly embedded in all of the premier platforms within the DoD. I don't see how it benefits the warfighter in any way to rip out the best in class on a whim. Even if that provides for new entrants, they're not going to be as good right now, and it's not a guarantee that they will develop to be as good or better. Um, that's a hard one to predict, but I think everyone should be paying attention to, particularly when you look at the direction coming out of the Pentagon about Claude in your supply chain for what kind of tools you use to build your own products and what these regulatory fights mean all the way downstream into smaller and new entrants. Because if you're using AWS coding tools that are built on Claude, you're now in violation of that supply chain. And that'll get, I have no doubt, struck down by a court at some point as a part of this regulatory fight. But if you take it at face value, there's a lot of companies, I mean, a lot of companies that need to immediately stop or pull their products from the DoD because it's built on the backbone of Claude.
So Simon, this feels a lot like. Do you remember? I think it was maybe 2018 or so when Google very publicly pulled
Feels
out
like
of
the
Maven.
reverse in my mind.
Yeah, but that what was featuring in Google pulling out of Maven was Google's global employees. Um, like the sentiment of the actual people that work there saying, "I will not be involved in the creation of these capabilities." So, like, I think the employee and the public sentiment matter here a lot too, right?
Yeah, and the to the point of the conversation we just had, right? If you just watch a potentially AI assisted strike kill a few dozen girls, how incentivized are you to be like, no, we should let the Pentagon cut loose? Like, yeah, that's the good position. It's a bad time to be having this argument, in my opinion. It's never a good time to be caught in this argument, but I think it's challenging on all sides, and I don't see a lot of incentives for either side to move off. Caveat: politicians rotate out in America. If there's one truth of the American system is that you can wait 4 years and you'll have a new bite at the apple. So if I'm Claude Anthropic, I don't have a ton of incentive to buckle because I know that in 3 years I'll get a new set of folks. I can hire a bunch of people onto my board that maybe will be more sympathetic in the next set of folks, and I'll get ready for changing political winds. Why pivot for them?
I actually don't think this was an IP argument at all, Simon. I think news reporting is pretty clear that this was a contractual prohibition position by Anthropic, saying
I
they
think it's
didn't want two big
analogous
things.
to the arguments that we have about IP.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah, analogous, sure. But my understanding was that this was a contract level use of technology conversation. It wasn't about who owns the IP, who has rights to what IP. It was Anthropic took the negotiating position of we will not be involved with fully autonomous weapon systems, and the U.S. government needs to commit to that, and also will not be used in mass domestic surveillance capabilities in the United States. So, um, again, those are negotiation positions in my mind. I think they were cast as red lines or kind of ultimate, walk away terms or provisions in the negotiating position. But that's what that was, and I think the more level-headed reasoned response from the U.S. government could be, well, we need we need full access. We need to be able to do what we need to do with it. Any lawful use is the line here from Secretary Hegseth at Department of War, and rather than blacklisting a company or forever mandating that the US government will never use this capability, they could just say, okay, well, if you can't sign up for these, provisions or uses, in the lawful execution of a contract, we're just not going to use you. And it could have been a lot more quiet, you know what I mean? I mean, isn't this classic Trump administration?
Totally.
Just
Look at the
kind of
tariffs, right? It's
flip the
100%
table.
tariffs on everybody, and then I'll walk it down to wherever I think it's appropriate.
Even on island nations populated only by penguins, right? So this is, in my mind, a table flipping kind of extreme position by the administration to try to bully pulpit, a company into doing what they want them to do. And I think this is at some level a righteous fight that will serve the American public long term, because it will force all parties to iron out all the wrinkles and figure out exactly how companies with critical technologies can engage ethically with the United States government. So anyway, I'm not taking a side there. I'm simply saying that this is an area in need of debate and negotiation. I will also say that every company intending to do work with the United States government, specifically in the defense world, you just need to be aware of and okay with the idea that your technology actually will be used in combat operations. There was that whole the
I don't think
starting with the
that's what they're
Google.
complaining about, though. Fully autonomous is different from being a part of a combat
I
operation.
totally agree. No, I totally agree. This is a more general comment that is not
Sure.
just
Yeah.
about
Okay.
this
Yeah.
Anthropic topic, right? Like, how many times have we heard drone companies say, "I'm never going to arm our drones," and the U.S. government cannot put munitions on my drones or whatever, And like, I'm sorry, you're either like selling a weapon system or you're selling something that touches a weapon system and you're involved with a kill chain somewhere. Like, you just kind of need to be okay with that in order to do work in this industry. And if you're not willing to do that, that's okay. Just maybe choose a
Yeah.
different industry.
Yeah. I mean, like, obviously, the DoD does what the DoD does, and it executes the political will of America by harming our enemies. That's it, holding them at risk. So anything you do with the DoD, you have to assume, even if you don't weaponize, that you will be holding people at risk and or harming them. That's the point of this institution.
That's right.
Now, there's a much scarier philosophical conversation around, did I build the thing that eliminates the need for people to decide who gets harmed? And maybe a lot of people see a non-distinction there. I see a huge distinction there where obviously I work for a company. I served in the Marine Corps. I've been in the defense space for my entire working life. Uh, I am very nervous about the idea of creating kill chains that execute themselves in their entirety. That's a very scary prospect.
So, but in this specific case, that's a much larger debate. I agree with you, Simon. In this specific case, do you think that Anthropic? I bring up the Google example of
Mhm.
Maven because do you think that Anthropic felt their leadership felt internal pressure because Anthropic was found. If unless I might have this a little off, I think Anthropic was founded by researchers who left OpenAI specifically to focus on a more AI safety and alignment, constitutional AI safety guardrails, responsible deployment. Like that was their brand, or at least as I understood it. So if they removed restrictions for military use, they would be sort of undermining their core identity. Is that I feel like that's why I feel like the leadership in the room in the negotiation with the Department of War was probably feeling pressure to keep the core brand of their
I think this is a capitalism problem, and this is one of those things where I probably side with Garrett. You find out one day that your company is designed to make money, and it will intrinsically try to make more money. That is what we all do. So you can start your company with all of the most high-minded ideals, but the bureaucracy itself is going to trend towards achieving the goal of a company, which is to make money. So like you're in a very difficult chicken or the egg incentives where you're constantly going to be trying to like stuff your successful company back into some sort of it's my criticism of like conscientious capitalism, right? Like, yeah, sure, you've got a conscience right up until your company's about to go under.
Maybe to tie this one off, two items that are just kind of like open, right? First, Anthropic has sued the United States government. Um,
Yeah.
and their
I think it's
contention is,
specifically on the supply chain stuff, right? Like that
well, their
that
contention is that this is they are alleging that this was an act of political retaliation. Uh, to do with Anthropic's refusal to comply fully with the U.S. government's lawful use language in contracting activities, and the designation of supply chain risk, which is what you're talking about, Simon, is another piece of this. In other words, it forces any other company doing business with the military, to include outfits like Palantir or Microsoft, to sever ties with Anthropic. And this is getting at your point about, like, are you using Anthropic in your development stack somewhere? Does that put us at risk? So, identified as a supply chain risk, it ended, but very clearly, on the capitalist topic, Simon, this ended a $200 million contract with Anthropic, and imposed a 6 month wind down period. So that's some of it. The other side of this is that, immediately upon the blacklisting, of Anthropic, OpenAI negotiated a replacement deal that would slot ChatGPT or OpenAI tools in for Anthropic tools, in some of these military and other systems. And they actually did sign up to the any lawful use language. And I think what they're doing is they're betting that they will be able to manage the relationship downstream once they're in stride with the contract. And again, like, will their ideals butt up against the demands of the US government? Perhaps, in the way that you just described, Simon, but perhaps not. Maybe OpenAI is actually much more open to the idea of getting involved with, lethal kill chains. So all of this um, might serve as headwinds for aspiring defense technology disruptors and innovators. So let's make a hard pivot into venture deals, or or perhaps better stated, uh, proposed or hypothetical, as yet hypothetical, big mega rounds that are proposed for 2026. So Andrew Industries is apparently out in market raising an $8 billion Series H round. Um, they are raising at a reputed $60 billion valuation, which is pretty crazy. Again, like, I worry about the hype machine that is a lot of what Anduril's doing, and that the hype will never be, delivered, right? Like, that the company will never actually live up to the hype. I think that's a big problem, because the exit and off ramp for a sizable company like Anduril means a lot for the rest of the industry. In other words, they're a category leader, they're a trendsetter, and companies like ours, in part, exist because of the bushwhacking and kind of trail breaking that companies like Anduril and Palantir before them have been doing for the past couple of decades. So that's one to keep an eye on. It's an amazingly large number, and I know some people who are very early Anduril employees, and I'm sure they're very happy with that number. But I do wonder. I wonder what it means long term. Shield AI has gone through a leadership pivot over the last year or so, with a new CEO installed. They are raising a $1 billion growth round, and are targeting something like an $11 to $12 billion post money valuation, or maybe that's a pre money term. I'm not really sure, but that would be a significant leap forward in terms of their venture valuation. And then Helsing, which has received some amount of critical discussion here on the Goat Rodeo, is apparently uh, executing some form of European-based venture deal that is giving them something in the range of a $14 billion valuation. I'm not sure what that means exactly, but they too are kind of riding this rising neoprime wave in the defense sector, but are seen as the darling of the European defense space as we move into, definitively into the 21st century. A number of other rounds are coming around for the year, to include Overland AI, Harmattan, Hadean, Saronic. Pretty interesting stuff, and still this mega round trend is happening. I'm going to maybe talk about one brief item and then open it up, and then we can move into show end. But this is all, in my mind, kind of identifying a structural shift in how the venture community is approaching the defense innovation and technology sector. So we've seen firms, Andreessen Horowitz famously with their American Dynamism Fund, General Catalyst with their Global Resilience Fund, and a range of other kind of similar, or maybe even boutique defense technology efforts. It used to be sort of a fringe item. It was like a fifth or a sixth focus area, and now it's seen as core pillar for a lot of these venture firms and what they're doing and what they're about. They are seemingly kind of widening the aperture from defense technology tools to more like invest in America, rebuild America, reindustrialize America type stuff, which is pretty interesting. And, it's getting into realms like space and other definitively dual use areas. A second is a big investment going into manufacturing. And the trade off there is kind of like looking at industrialization and manufacturing as a core rather than invention or innovation. That's a trade off. And then defense related M&A and IPO stuff has, according to some reports, been surging. So what that means is that we're now 9 years into the defense technology renaissance that I posit started in the 2015, 2016, 2017 period. And that is average fund life cycles. We should be seeing, consolidation, M&A activities, perhaps some big flare outs, but also some direct listings and IPOs, signaling to the industry that this is actually a defensible venture investable category. So all of the Anthropic kind of headwinds, Anthropic related headwinds notwithstanding, I think this is still a hot period for defense venture, and we're going to see it heat up not just here in Q1 of 26, but well into the rest of the year and probably deep into the future. What think you, my co-hosts?
So I think that Andrew is interesting because I'm talking about the potential, potentially hype or being skeptical. And 60 billion you said 60 billion, I think. That
Yeah.
is a huge number.
Yep.
However, to put it in context, Lockheed's valuation or maybe market cap is somewhere around 150 billion. So like that's Andrew, we're talking about maybe 40% of Lockheed Martin's valuation. I mean, obviously, there's a huge discrepancy in the amount of revenue they're making, but if you put it in the context of like the top 3 defense prime contractors, 60 billion doesn't sound that crazy. If they're really going to compete with the big dogs.
Sure, except that you could contend that the major defense prime contractors have been delivering real material value that comprise the core of nearly every large program of record across the Department of Defense for decades. And Anduril is kind of like, this is an unfair comparison, I think, but I'm going to say it anyway. Do you remember when President Obama was given the Nobel Peace Prize before having done anything? It was simply the intention to get something done, right? Like, and I'm not contesting like the power of intention. It can be great in setting a different trajectory for whatever you care about, right? So like simply occupying the chair of commander in chief and president of the United States and articulating a different vision for the world is a powerful thing in and of itself. Similarly, Anduril is promising, and I think this is a good thing, promising a different future for the way that we do defense in America and perhaps in the West. And I think that is a good thing. Does that warrant a massive $60 billion valuation ahead of actually having truly achieved like the massive deliverables that they kind of are touting? I don't believe it, but that, again, Obama might have deserved that Nobel Peace Prize. Anduril might deserve a massive venture valuation. And yeah, who's to say?
I just want to say that Nicolas Maduro, then president of Venezuela, said that the word was surprise and perhaps premature. Got him back.
Sure.
Not my president, Maduro.
So Garrett, that makes sense, and I have a healthy amount of skepticism here. The real question for me, or I guess my point is, how much of that $200 billion backlog contracts that Lockheed has can Anduril actually take away? Because some of those, Anduril might be able to take some of that market share. Lockheed is locked into a lot of many multi-year sort of. I mean, the F-35 Lightning II, the Trident D5, the Aegis combat system missiles. That's stuff that's really hard for Anduril to take away from.
So I would contend that only some of that valuation is indicative of having taken market positions from other companies. There's a reason why. There are many reasons, I'm sure, but there are some reasons behind the $1.5 trillion budget request from President Trump, right? What we're talking about is creating a massive amount of new market terrain that can be occupied. Our company's capitalizing on that. Like, yes, we are beating some legacy players for programs of record and inclusion into, components of various programs managed by other primes. But we are also capitalizing on the rising kind of wave of new programs and new requirements and emerging capability gaps that we wouldn't be stealing or taking or usurping from other incumbents. We would be occupying them as, wholly new vendors in this mix. So my contention is actually that part of the reason for an increased budget request from the president is to allow for the legacy players to maintain market position and allow for the new entrants to actually, occupy new market positions, and the pie grows.
Getting bigger.
The pie's getting bigger, right? So, is it at some level fake because it's it's government spending? Sure, but it's pretty real if you're Palmer Luckey.
Be real if your government controls the world's currency.
Yeah, so, but
government spending here is special government spending.
I mean, that's the underpinning behind modern monetary theory. It's like you spend,
whatever
you spend, you spend.
Does, it's real. It's over.
It's real. It's real because we, the world's reserve currency, say it's real. Okay, well, hot and frothy. It remains here in the defense technology venture world. I'll just say that GE Aerospace apparently is a $325 billion publicly traded entity that does a lot of defense work. That's, propulsion systems and a range of other stuff. Palantir is also massive. I think it exceeded Lockheed Martin in market cap last year. And anyhow, like there's there's a lot of froth. And I would say hype, and perhaps it's positive and good hype. Like this is an energy, it's a trajectory, and we're part of that as well. So
it's crazy. Anthropic's valuation, $380 billion.
Right. And the reason that can be is that that they are not a military technology. This is like mass market, everybody uses it sort of a thing.
They're underpinning like Snowflake now and all these, like it's incredible. But I also, candidly, valuation for AI, take it with a grain of salt. I think that thing is bubble feels like a charged term, but it feels a lot like it's getting there.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Well, as we do traditionally here on the Goat Rodeo podcast, we're going to ask Simon to defend his shirt. So defend that shirt.
That's got to be a punk rock one for sure.
Yeah. Avail is a famous.
Wait, Simon, are you into punk rock?
No, I like t-shirts. Get together. Come on. I got Share t-shirts. But anyway, Avail, famous Richmond punk band, big in the 90s, kind of the similar era of Green Day, same record label, and then famously turned down their Sony record deal and continued to be a small market punk band.
I note the stick figure of, is that a flag or is it one of those hobo sacks? What is that thing?
It's referred to as the Dixie Man.
Dixie Man.
Yeah, it's from the cover of Avail's record Dixie. It's I think there's like an old. I mean, it's designed to be like train graffiti, for like hobos and stuff. And there's a version of him like walking with a stick in a bag, I believe. But the Avail version has the flag.
So in the punk culture, these are the Avail are the ones that aren't sellouts. Are they hailed as the
Avail very aggressively for a long time was like the gold standard for not selling out. Like after turning down their Sony record deal, continued to play shows for like Food Not Bombs benefits and things like. They reunited, and there's debate about how that reunion went. I don't care at all. They're great, awesome band, wonderful,
and even better shirts. Which matters.
Deep lore for everybody. The very first Sublime music video features an Avail t-shirt as old buddies of the band, but that was pre-fame Sublime. A lot of weird little connectivity out there.
Yeah. Rest in peace, Bradley. Okay. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Dave. It's a pleasure talking with you both every week. And if you are part of the audience, please subscribe and refer us to your friends. We'd love to include you in the conversation. Send us notes. We're happy to cover and talk about stuff that matters to our listening audience. And we'll see you next week on the Goat Rodeo. Adios.